I'd just like to thank our colleagues for
The lady
this.
may proceed.
I would just like to thank our colleagues for the support for this historic measure, the passage of Committee Report Number 304, or the Philippine Natural Gas Industry Development Act. This is a momentous step forward as we strive to achieve energy security and sustainable economic growth. This legislation supports our own and also international commitments to cleaner and more efficient energy production. We have to remember that natural gas is a transition fuel, and our goal is to move to renewables. This also protects consumer welfare because with the entry, with the encouragement of more investments in natural gas, we will have energy security that will be able to provide for more accessibility to natural gas, and consumers will be able to benefit from this. Again, historically, indigenous natural gas has been cheaper, and to have more opportunities for natural gas will only make the prices even cheaper. I thank all our colleagues, and we are looking forward to see the benefits of this measure, not tomorrow, not at the end of the year, because energy security is a generational commitment. So this is for the next generation. Hopefully we all live healthy lives to see the benefits of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Noted and entered into the records. What is the pleasure of the Honorable Gatchalian?
Mr. President, requesting to explain my vote, Mr.
The
President.
gentleman may proceed.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I rise today to cast my no vote on the proposed Philippine Natural Gas Industry Development Act. At the onset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the esteemed sponsor, Senator Pia Cayetano, for taking the time to engage in thoughtful discussions with this representation and for her dedication to this bill. While we fully acknowledge the importance of indigenous natural gas in bolstering the nation's energy security, this representation believes that we must balance this with the cost impact on consumers. Our foremost obligation is to ensure that the welfare of our people remains at the center of our legislative actions, especially when it comes to energy pricing, which has a direct impact on every Filipino household. My primary concern centers on Section 23 of the bill regarding natural gas supply, specifically on two major points. First, the impact it will have on the merit order. The bill states that power produced from indigenous natural gas shall have priority over conventional energy sources. This means that even if power from other conventional energy sources will have a lower bid in the wholesale electricity spot market than power from indigenous natural gas, the latter will still be prioritized. This will push up spot prices, thereby placing the burden on higher prices on consumers. Second, the absence of a competitive bidding or price discovery mechanisms for the procurement of indigenous natural gas. Competitive bidding or price discovery serves as a means to discover the lowest possible price, promoting efficiency among investors and ensuring that consumers benefit from the most affordable rates. Without this essential process, there is no concrete assurance that consumers will pay the lowest price and investors will render the most efficient service. Moreover, we need to be reminded that while Malampaya is our own, it is priced and paid in US dollars, which subjects consumers to foreign exchange risk that can further increase costs, much like imported fuel. This underscores the need for competitive bidding or price discovery to ensure consumers pay only the lowest price possible. In addition, a mandated offtake for indigenous gas without competitive bidding or price discovery would allow indigenous gas suppliers to set prices without restriction, potentially resulting in higher costs passed on to consumers. The absence of price discovery and price control at the upstream stage, ang unang hakbang ng produksyon kung saan kinukuha ang natural gas mula sa mga likas na pinagkukunan, coupled with a minimum supply requirement and minimum percentage requirement at the downstream level, kung saan ang mga nakuhang supply ay ipinamamahagi sa gas power plants at ibinebenta ang kuryente galing sa mga ito upang magamit ng mga consumer, raises a significant price risk to consumers affecting their welfare. This could lead to increase in electricity rates as consumers are required to buy electricity from gas power plants who are in turn required to buy indigenous gas. If this bill is passed, consumers will be required to pay for indigenous gas even when it is more expensive than imported gas. For example, Meralco's latest competitive selection process results show that levelized cost of electricity using imported gas is 7.7 pesos per kilowatt hour, while a blended indigenous gas and imported gas costs 8.45 pesos per kilowatt hour. Once enacted, consumers will be mandated to pay the higher rate that uses indigenous gas. This means, based on the example, an average household consuming 200 kilowatt hours per month will pay an additional 276 pesos when they could have paid less. Mr. President, our responsibility to the Filipino people is to protect their interests and to act as guardians of consumer welfare. For these reasons, with the goal of ensuring a fair and balanced energy market that puts consumers first, I cast my no vote on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian. Noted and entered into the records.
President, the Deputy Minority Leader is seeking the floor.
What is the pleasure of the Honorable Ontiveros?
Mr. President, if I may also be allowed to explain my vote.
The lady may proceed.
Salamat Abi, Mr. President. I must respectfully vote no on Senate Bill number 2793, despite the acceptance of some of my amendments, for which I thank the good sponsor, notably the provision on stranded assets. This provision, by the way, is mainly an antidote to the logic of excessive encouragement of investors in the natural gas industry. My primary reasons for opposing this bill align with some of the deep concerns articulated by Senator Gatchalian. This bill prioritizes indigenous natural gas, potentially undermining and abandoning the least cost principle, which is a crucial safeguard for Filipino consumers against unreasonable electricity prices. This departure from the least cost principle of EPIRA as a principle and procedural guide pertains to fuel selection by the aggregator and generators, generator selection by distribution utilities, and dispatch of generators by the WESM, and is simply unacceptable. Under this bill, the domestic natural gas sector will be under no pressure at all to match their selling price with what is available from regional and global markets. Despite that, the Philippine energy sector is required to purchase everything that the sector will produce. Even the most inefficient wells will be guaranteed a market. This abolition of the least cost principle creates harmful barriers to entry. Just as it would be unwise for, say, a family to dismiss the potential of fiber optic internet based solely on current costs, policymakers should carefully weigh the costs and benefits of both imported and indigenous natural gas. A smart approach would be for the family to encourage fiber optic development, acknowledging its future cost reductions and superior performance, even if it seems less favorable at present. This abandonment of the least cost principle may even affect, without categorically saying, the greatest potential of renewable energy to drive down electricity cost, especially when more and more investments are encouraged into this sector rather than to another fossil industry, which future is clearly defined in climate negotiations as a false solution and unsustainable. The bill's stance on cross-ownership is particularly troubling. My proposed amendment, which would have granted the Energy Regulatory Commission the authority to determine cross-ownership limits for LNG facilities, was rejected. This amendment was inspired by concerns over badly regulated, potentially misbehaving monopolies, particularly in the transport segment of the gas industry. I believe that allowing the ERC to set cross-ownership limits when it saw fit, but not necessarily right at the start, would have fostered fair access and competition among common facilities and ultimately benefit consumers. This approach would allow us to learn from the challenges experienced with the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines and its control over transmission lines. The bill's sponsor argued that such restrictions would discourage investment, especially in the nascent natural gas industry. She believed that ownership of storage and transportation facilities by one entity would accelerate investments. She also maintained that cross-ownership restrictions would have been premature for an industry in its early stages, and also said there was also that option of building one's own gas transport infrastructure. I'm still not sure if the sponsor seriously meant what she said, that other entities needing to transport gas supplies, instead of relying on cross-ownership restrictions that would eliminate bias in favor of a sister company, should instead be ready to build their own facilities. During the pandemic, Mr. President, we set up rules for the use of common towers so different telcos could transmit their signals because we knew that it made no sense to do otherwise. This bill, in its current form, could perpetuate past mistakes in our energy sector. I urged my fellow senators to carefully consider these concerns as we proceeded with this important legislation. As we speak, the United States' own ramping up of gas production for export abroad, which started way before the Russia-Ukraine war, is set to turn President-elect Donald Trump into a salesman for what is expected to be a gas oversupply. The U.S. became the biggest natural gas exporter when it was able to quickly fill up the gas demand after Europe could no longer secure gas from Russia. And there's much more where that came from. U.S. export capacity is set to about double in the next 5 years. Qatar is also expanding its production. This at a time when the major gas demand centers of the EU, Japan, and Korea seem set to reduce their demand. Meanwhile, we pushed for this law that will single-handedly try to add still more to that looming oversupply. Salamat tabi, Mr. President.
Noted and entered into the records. Thank you, Senator Rivera. What is the pleasure of the Honorable Cayetano?
Mr. President, I would just like to clarify a few matters. It's a very important bill. This bill, to be clear, is good for the country. It is good for the environment, and it is good for every consumer. This bill will help us, just like agricultural products, ensure that we have our own supply. We can be a nation importers if that is what we want. But no, we take a stand and we decide that we want to develop our own indigenous sources. Renewable energy currently under existing laws already has priority. Sila ang mauuna. This is now a transition fuel that we are also saying bigyan din ng priority because indigenous fuel to. Hindi lang puro importation. To make it clear, pwede pa rin mag-import. Anyone who wants to import can still do that, but now we are paving the ground for indigenous sources, which will make it cheaper for our consumers. Mr. President, to also be very, very clear, we have price mechanisms. We have transparency. The law is very clear about fair and open access. Hindi po totoo na hindi malalaman ang presyo. Hindi po totoo na ipipilit sa mga consumers ang mamahalin na presyo. Ilang beses ko po pinakita sa chart sa ating mga kababayan at sa ating mga kasama na historically, napakababa nga ng presyo ng indigenous gas. So wag ho natin takutin ang ating mga kababayan na by prioritizing indigenous gas, magmamahal. Hindi po totoo yon. And what I'd also like to emphasize, Mr. President, is currently, ngayon, ang mga power plants nagne-negotiate ng kanilang mga bibilhin na, kung anong presyo nila bibilhin yung fuel supply nila. Nagne-negotiate, wala akong bidding. So wala ho akong pinapalitan. Hindi ko ho tinatanggalan ng bidding kasi wala akong bidding dun sa level na yon. Negotiated po yon. Those are supply agreements. Ganun pa rin. Same ang patakaran. Fair and open access to all the information available. So again, I repeat, this bill is good for the country. This bill is good for the environment. And this is good for the Filipino consumers. Thank you.
Noted once more and entered into the records. Majority Floor
Mr.
Leader.
President, Senator Raffy Tulfo would like to issue a manifestation as well. I move that he be recognized.
Senator Tulfo is recognized. What is the pleasure of the good gentleman? A manifestation?
Yes, Mr.
The
President.
gentleman may proceed.
Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues in the Senate Good afternoon. When I filed this bill back in May 2023, I realized how complex the energy industry was. That being said, there was a very simple principle that I discovered then and which I recognize now. And that is, if our energy security depends on imports, then that is no security at all. In fact, it gives us a false sense of energy security. This was all proven to us during the spark of Russian and Ukraine war, where oil industry was held hostage by factors out of our control. We are lucky that this did not heavily affect the electrification of our major cities and critical facilities. But we cannot afford to risk being dependent on luck and external circumstances when it comes to ensuring that our essential services, economic infrastructure, and continuity of business operations remain unstable. To address this and ensure our country's sustainable growth, the Department of Energy needs power generated from gas to go from 20% of the country's energy mix to 40% in less than 20 years. This is even larger than the share of renewable energy. Indeed, natural gas power is critical to our country's economic growth. And while I'm a strong supporter of renewable energy, I similarly recognize its limitations at the moment. For example, solar energy's availability and generation is affected by weather conditions, such as cloud cover and time of day. Similar with wind energy, this volatility means that we cannot safely rely on renewables as our electricity baseload until technology overcomes these limitations in an economical manner. Hopefully, technology could be developed in the future to address these concerns. But for now, natural gas is of utmost importance to our energy security, and it is urgent that we develop our own indigenous sources of gas. Mr. President, mahirap ang umasa sa iba, and we've been this with other countries who were too dependent on foreign sources, such as some of our neighbors in Southeast Asia. The Natural Gas Act provides enough incentives for the development by private entities to ensure total independence from foreign sources. Natural gas, by its nature and by the technology present, gives enough reliability against the predictability of weather. Lastly, the provision of the bill would ensure that no sudden price fluctuation would occur in the energy market, making energy more available and affordable at the same time, so that the simple Filipino household and not only big businesses would benefit from the passage of this act into law. I would like to manifest my appreciation to Senator Pia Cayetano, my successor at the Senate Committee on Energy, for championing this bill on the floor. I ask my colleagues to look into the wisdom of this law and the policy of our transition from coal to natural gas. The research submitted to the committee during the deliberation of this bill will give us enough reason to approve this measure with haste. The Philippine Downstream Natural Gas Industry Development Act will drive a new age for indigenous oil and gas exploration and utilization. Filipino natural gas is for the Filipino people. This is the best kind of energy security that we can secure this nation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Noted and entered into the records. Majority Floor Leader.
President, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is likewise seeking the floor.
Senator Padilla is recognized for his manifestation.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. Una po sa lahat, gusto ko pong batiin ang senadora mula sa Taguig Pateros, Senator Pia Cayetano, sa napakagandang panukala po na ito, sapagkat kung matatandaan niyo po, September 5, 2022, nung ako po ay gumawa ng privilege speech. At yung pong patungkol po sa oil and gas exploration, ang akin pong iminungkahi sapagkat sa akin pong palagay, ito po talaga ay makatutulong sa ating ekonomiya. At ganoon din po, ako din po ay nandito upang purihin din po ang atin pong minority leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros at si Senator Win Gatchalian sa kanila naman pong ibang naratibo. At ito po ay pagpapatunay lamang ng ating pagiging balanse dito po sa ating Senado. Ngayon po, ang akin pong mungkahi sa pagtayo, bilang paulit-ulit pong inuulit ang salitang indigenous, hinihiling ko po sa akin pong mga kasama na meron pong kapatid yan, yung indigenous. Kung may indigenous gas po, meron pong indigenous people. Alam niyo po, ito pong mga exploration na nagaganap, kadalasan po, kapag ka nagkaroon po ng mga minahan, napapabayaan po yung ating mga indigenous. Kaya ako po'y nagpapasalamat din sa atin pong SP, Senate President, at kanya pong isinulong po dito sa panukala na ito, yung atin pong amenda na nagbibigay po ng proteksyon sa mga indigenous people. Kaya muli po, gusto ko lamang pong pasalamatan ang lahat ng aking mga kasama, maging pabor man o hindi pabor sa batas na ito. Ang akin lang pong muling hiling, sana po sa kaduluduluhan, ang makinabang po ay yung ating mga katutubo. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay po.
Noted and entered into the records. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 10800 under Committee Report number 335. This is the bill on the 2025 General Appropriation